Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating piece of history. We're talking about the ultimate blueprint of power and exactly how George Washington built the American presidency literally from scratch. You know, when we think of Washington today, we usually just picture that stoic face on the $1 bill, right? Or maybe some giant marble statue. But the reality? The man was essentially the startup architect of the executive branch as we know it. He didn't just step into an office, he actually created the traditions and the boundaries of that office in real time.
Okay, let's dive into this. Seriously, how do you build a democracy from scratch? Think about the enormous stakes here for a second. When Washington took office, the new country had exactly zero executive branch infrastructure, zilch. They were coming off the old Articles of Confederation, which, let's be honest, had incredibly weak leadership. There was essentially no executive power, no way to effectively collect taxes, and a totally worthless currency. And on top of all that, there was this very real, palpable fear among the people of reverting right back to a monarchy. I mean, they had just fought a brutal war to get away from a king, and now they were creating a singular, powerful leader. It was an incredibly delicate tightrope to walk.
So here's our agenda for today's Explainer. First, inventing the presidency. Second, the title, Mr. President. Third, a cabinet of rivals. Fourth, the power of walking away. And finally, an enduring cultural icon. We're going to trace the specific choices Washington made that created the blueprint still governing the nation today.
Right, jumping into Section 1, Inventing the American Presidency. After the Constitutional Convention of 1787, Washington was actually unanimously elected by the Electoral College. He's the only president in U.S. history to achieve that, by the way. But stepping into the role meant facing an unprecedented blank slate. The Constitution gave an outline, sure, but definitely not an instruction manual. In a letter to James Madison, Washington actually wrote, "As the first of everything in our situation will serve to establish a precedent, it is devoutly wished on my part that these precedents be fixed on true principles." He was acutely aware of his unique position in history. Every single move he made, who he talked to, how he delivered messages, even how he managed his day-to-day schedule, would set the absolute rules for the future of the Republic. So, what did those precedents actually look like in practice? Well, he established the inaugural address, the practice of sending direct messages to Congress, and, super importantly, the cabinet form of the executive branch. He didn't just govern, he completely invented the procedures of governing. You can kind of think of him like the startup CEO of a brand new nation. He had to write the employee handbook while simultaneously trying to keep the whole enterprise from going under. Moving on to Section 2, the title, Mr. President. You see, before he could even begin governing, there was this massive debate over what to actually call the new leader of the free world. It sounds trivial to us now, but back then, titles meant absolutely everything. And this brilliantly illustrates the tension of the era. The Senate actually proposed calling him His Majesty, or get this, His Highness the President. Those are titles you'd expect in some pompous royal court, not a newly forged republic. But Washington argued against this. He favored the shockingly simple Republican choice, Mr. President. By choosing a civilian, non-royal title, he immediately grounded the executive branch in democratic principles. It signaled to the world that he was a citizen chosen to lead, not a ruler anointed to reign. Okay, Section 3, a cabinet of rivals. So while the title was settled, the actual day-to-day governing quickly revealed a new, almost existential threat to the young nation, and that was internal factionalism. To handle the massive workload of the new government, Washington created executive departments in 1789, officially forming his cabinet. But almost immediately, a bitter partisan divide formed right under his nose. Washington purposely surrounded himself with brilliant minds, right? But his two closest advisors had fundamentally incompatible visions for the country. On one side, you had Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury, leading the Federalist Party. He wanted to promote national credit and build a financially powerful, centralized nation. On the other side, Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of State, founded the Jeffersonian Republicans specifically to oppose Hamilton's agenda. Jefferson favored a more decentralized agrarian republic. Now, Washington personally favored Hamilton's economic agenda, but he had to constantly act as a referee. He remained officially nonpartisan, desperately trying to keep this fierce rivalry from tearing the brand new government apart. To protect this super fragile internal balance, Washington knew he had to keep the country out of foreign conflicts, so he issued the Proclamation of Neutrality in 1793. When the French Revolutionary Wars broke out, he declared the U.S. formally impartial. And this wasn't just a piece of paper. He actively enforced it. He even demanded the recall of a French minister, Edmond Charles Genet,
because the guy was actively trying to organize militias and procure American ships to fight British allies. Washington recognized that getting dragged into a European war would absolutely destroy the financially strapped and politically divided United States.
Which brings us to Section 4, the power of walking away. As his presidency progressed, Washington dealt with heavy partisan criticism and just the sheer exhaustion of holding the nation together. He actually wanted to retire after his first term, but was convinced by both Jefferson and Hamilton that his absence would cause the country to collapse. But by the end of his second term, he made a truly revolutionary choice.
2. That number represents perhaps the single most important precedent Washington ever set. He voluntarily stepped down after 2 terms. In a world completely dominated by kings, emperors, and despots who clung to power until their dying breath, the leader of a nation willingly surrendering his authority, that was practically unheard of. By walking away, he established the ultimate precedent of a peaceful transfer of power, proving once and for all that the office was bigger than the man.
But you know, he didn't just leave quietly. He left us with the 1796 farewell address. Initially drafted with James Madison years prior and then heavily revised by Alexander Hamilton, this document became his valedictory statement to the American people. And to this day, it's still considered one of the most influential statements on republicanism in American history.
So the crucial point is what he actually warned us about. He left behind specific, stern warnings for the future. He predicted the extreme dangers of political parties and hyperpartisanship, warning that would lead to a divided nation. He also cautioned against entangling foreign alliances that could draw America into endless wars. And he stressed that religion and morality were indispensable supports for a functioning republic. He was essentially handing his successors a giant roadmap of pitfalls to avoid.
And he anchored all of those warnings in a heartfelt plea for unity. He wrote, "The name of American must always exalt the just pride of patriotism." He deeply believed that a unified national identity absolutely had to supersede regional loyalties or partisan divides. It was his final, powerful piece of advice to a nation he literally spent his life building.
All right, our last section. Section 5, an enduring cultural icon. After his death in 1799, a really interesting shift happened. Washington transformed from a highly scrutinized, real-life politician dealing with everyday partisan battles into this monumental, almost godlike figure in American culture.
Part of that transformation involved literal myth-making. We all know the famous story, right? The young Washington chopping down his father's cherry tree and saying, "I cannot tell a lie." Well, spoiler alert, that story was completely invented. It was dreamed up by a biographer named Mason Locke Weems back in 1809. It was basically a hagiographic myth made up to humanize Washington and inspire patriotism and morality in young Americans. So yeah, never proven true, but it successfully cemented his reputation for absolute, unwavering honesty. And his historical footprint only grew more massive over time. In 1885, the colossal Washington Monument was dedicated in the Capitol. By 1931, the George Washington Bridge connected New York and New Jersey. And incredibly, in 1976, during the bicentennial, he was posthumously promoted to General of the Armies. That ensures he will forever rank first among all officers of the United States Army. Pretty wild, right?
But hey, it's not just giant monuments and bridges. His legacy is literally in our pockets and on our maps today. He's the face of the $1 bill and the quarter. Our national capital bears his name, and he is still the only president to have an entire U.S. state named after him. He is just inescapably woven into the daily fabric of American life. Which brings us to the end of our explainer, but before we go, I want to leave you with this provocative question. Are we still successfully following the precedents and warnings Washington left in his farewell address? When we look at our modern political landscape, with all its intense partisanship and complex global alliances, it is really worth reflecting on whether the America of today truly honors that incredibly delicate, carefully considered blueprint that George Washington built. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I really hope this explainer gave you a brand new perspective on the father of his country.